Lena, we're writing a unit on Ute history to be presented to Title I schools in our area. Since you are one of the terminated Utes, we'd like to have any opinions or any information you have and how you feel on termination.
To me, as far as termination concerns, I think it was the very best thing for me and my family. We know just exactly where we stand in the 3MT, what we can do, we can't, we're saying we're upset. But I think that it was very unnecessary because actually, already the enrollment cut down to less than 1/2 unit, which eventually would have taken care of all mixed blood members, so that they would no longer be a brother.
And LaRena, how do you feel about termination bill?
Well, at first, I wasn't very satisfied with the termination bill because I didn't feel like that the people should be separated. We had mixed bloods married full bloods, and this was what eventually caused trouble in the family. Some of the children were enrolled with mixed bloods, some as full bloods, then through their intermarriage, it caused difficulties and I was at the dinner council meeting when this was brought up. This idea is being presented to the people were the first time they heard it. Previous to that, there was meetings being held whereby that and not circulated on the reservation of people whereby that they were going to divide the reservation according to population and according to the people disturbed me. And but when we had this dinner council meeting, this could be totally new. It was seriously, I remember very distinctly. Well, gentlemen, who was a respected member of my family, you went a bit. But an gentleman who said, I'm forcing trouble amongst my people. And I recently did talk about this. Then come back and tell what we want to do about. But I don't like it. Well, the lady who had made the motion for the division, Juanita Workman McClure, most that's Mary President Allen, made the motion. And I went from the platform back and asked her to take her motion back. But we could respect this old leader of UNHCR, in which she refused to do. And her sister broke on her second to divide the people. When I approached them about this at the meeting, he made the remark, lots of that's my money and I want. And I felt very unfair that it should be discussed and everybody should understand. But we live in a democracy, hereby we have to abide by what majority said. Majority says that there would be by the innovation between those less than a half degree plus. And it's open. And I was going to abide by that. However, just make there were some 15 against this motion. And then after this, then they formulated it's an organization affiliated youth system. And this organization was merely to take care of the division of the assets between the two groups of people. And the thing it was there was preamble to the Constitution. I think that would have been a good thing, but however, we did not apply it because we were not careful enough to the people on the board who understood Indian problems lived on the reservation and were acquainted in what rightfully should be theirs. Immediately, when the termination program, or previous deal, I might say, we started to get a little notice from Plains Get United States government. And all of a sudden, we get all kinds of Indians on a reservation. Until where people still lived on a reservation, all of a sudden were full blood. I was taught of public law 671. I was all the way to towns with some other people. And in spite of what they say, I think public law 671 speaks to go off. However, I concur with what Mrs. Sixkiller said, that there was no need for a termination program because we had one already in force. And then this brings to mind what would happen now. Because under the present system that the tribe has, if they have an epidemic on a reservation and everybody died except one man, he'd own the whole reservation. And this doesn't happen now since it's been terminated because our children or our heirs can inherit what we have. Why would it? Why don't you just put it up here? Or the dog? I'd like to say this. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to bring you up today a brief report on its termination bill, Public Law 671. I think it's your microphone. Where is it? Oh, it's right here. Go ahead. Are you in front of it? Sometimes you turn your microphone around. If there's in between you and what's recording, it don't happen. Go ahead. Things that have this opportunity to bring to you today, or I mean to talk to you today about our termination bill, Public Law 671. Years ago, our ancestors probably had some kind of a meeting, and perhaps under different circumstances. Nevertheless, in their hearts, as in ours, they met for a common cause, and for that benefit of all concerned. A better understanding has come between our group. Because we have entered into the communities, mingled with our white neighbors, and have learned to do our business on our own without having to run to our Greek white father for help. Well, has this to get to tell you? I don't just think that's, I have here. Now to go back to Public Law 671, which was approved in 1954. This law pertained to mixed blood members of the Ute Indian tribe. 490 mixed blood members of the Ute Indian tribe of the Uinta Reservation in Utah were withdrawn from the tribe. And then they commenced to set up their own organization as I spoke of before they affiliated its citizens. And they proposed a constitution and bylaws, which was drafted by the mixed blood group, and I happen to be on that board also. This had to be approved by the Bureau of Indian Affairs and be ratified by a majority of the mixed blood members. And under this proposed or approved constitution, as Superintendent John O'Crow, who was at the agency at the time conducted the election of them boards, which I didn't feel like it was done right. Of course, I never approved of anything anybody was doing anyway. But here's good. I'll get it. Well, the purpose of this tier organization was merely to divide the assets between the two groups of people, and that is assets that could be divided. Assets that could not be divided would later become under the organization of a distribution corporation. assets were divided was land to once. And under this plan, there was 2 livestock organizations started: the Rock Creek Cattle Range Company and the Antelope Sheep Range Company. Now, the reason for the 2 companies was because of the type of land that was given to the affiliated Ute citizens as their share of the land on the reservation. And it's understandable that you couldn't get the very best land. It all had to be fair and equal. Therefore, some winter and sheep range was allocated to the mixed bloods, and also summer range for sheep, likewise cattle. And in these two organizations, there was a board set up elected by the people, which was done in 1958, November 1st, 1958. And 1 share of stock was issued in each corporation. These corporations were incorporated in the laws of the state of Utah, likewise Ute Distribution Corporation. Since then, 467 mixed bloods have sold their shares of stock in both corporations back to Ute Indian tribes.
Quote that again, LaRena.
Oh, let me do it. Stop just a minute. Stop. Help. Of the 490 stock members in the corporations, which was issued each 1 share of stock, 464 shares of stock have been sold back to Ute Indian tribes. There's some 38 members who did not sell their shares of stock to the tribe, and who later, through district court, dissolved the 2 corporations and received land. Say something now. Instead say sick, she monitoring. Was it sick Lewis in there and Dawn? See, that makes 8. Yeah. Yep. But like I said, if they went back to the, now to get back to the 2 cattle corporations, or sheep and cattle corporations I was talking about, they were issued, I just can't recall right this time the number of acres, but it's over 100,000 acres of land in the Rock Creek area. And this land was put on the tax rolls in Duchesne County. And then when these 28 people, or get back to the 38 people who did not sell their stock, went to court and dissolved the 2 corporations and got their share of the assets in the 2 corporations. This land was then transferred off the tax rolls back under in trust by the government for the Ute tribe, and this I didn't like, because I felt like that once it's put on the tax roll, it should stay on the tax roll. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because I'm active in Duchesne County. Since I've been terminated, I get involved in things, and the opinion of the public is that the government gives Indians checks every month, and whenever they need anything, all they have to do is run the agency for it, and this isn't true. And I've been trying to have a campaign all of my own to instruct the public that the Indian only gets what he earns, just like everyone else, that he has to pay an income tax. And I'd like to say now that the termination program has been good for me. I have been able to get out and conduct my own business. Of course, I did this before without any trouble, but I never was one to run to the government for help, only to get educated. And I went to an Indian boarding school in Riverside. And when I came back from Sherman and graduated in 1931, by the way, I went down there when I was 11 years old, and I cried the whole year as I was lonesome to come back to the reservation. I don't know what for, because all I had at home was bread and gravy, because my father worked for the government, and I had 11 brothers and sisters. And when I got to Sherman, I had bread and gravy again, only it was thicker and wasn't good as what my mother made. However, when I was at school, I could come home in summertime. I went to work get some money so I could have some, because it was real hard for my folks to send me a train fare or bus fare to come home. But when they did, I was real happy to come home, and I was always glad to go back to school. I could just live for 1931 when I'd graduate, and I remember very well when I graduated, the night of graduation. I cried because I couldn't go back to sure, but I cried because I was there. Then I cried because I couldn't go back. But these are wonderful years, and it's like a lady said to me not long ago. She said, well, if I had an education like you, maybe I could be doing something too. And I told her that she had the same opportunity as I did. I went to boarding school and she could have went too. But it is the advantages that you get, really. It's what you do yourself as an individual. And I'd like to say this, that I think that right now, that the Indians better quit feeling sorry for themselves and start doing something for themselves as an individual. And not cry, I'm an Indian and everybody are going to scalp me, because that isn't true. They've got to start working for themselves and do something as an individual. And the Indians have every advantage in the world to go to school and to do this. I wish that I wasn't so old. I might go on to school and do some more, but I'm learning. And the termination program has taught me many things. For one thing, it has taught me prejudice. Because our Indian people were told at this general council meeting that the mixed bloods no longer would participate in anything. And I would like to state right now that at this general council meeting, all that was said at the meeting was not interpreted. The interpreter didn't tell, the interpreter didn't tell all that was being said in Indian to those who could not understand India. And this was very bad, because later, when it turned out that the mixed bloods were still going to get something, made the full bloods unhappy. This created a door of animosity, prejudice. Even our superintendents, when we would go to the agency and try to get something done, they would say, what are you white people doing over here? Until one day we had to sit down and show in Public Law 671, whereby it was the superintendent's responsibility to do certain things. And I'm not talking about Stan Wyman. Stan Wyman is one of the best superintendents that we've ever had here. He's an understanding man. Turn it off, guy. Now, up until the present time, the present superintendent that we had, we weren't able to go to the agency and ask questions or to get a birth certificate. Now, we have some things that needs to be done that I would suggest in any termination act should be done first before any people would be terminated from federal supervision. Number one is that a birth certificate be issued to every person who's been terminated, or even though they're not being terminated. Now, up until 1924, previous to that, there was no birth certificates issued, and some of our people do not have any identification whatsoever. We are in the process right now through our good Senator Ted Moss to introduce a bill in the next Congress whereby that all Indians throughout the United States and the territory of Alaska be issued birth certificates by the superintendents on the reservation, so that they should have some kind of identification. Now, we have just recently, within this last week, we had one of the members who had been terminated from supervision. He still has stock in the Ute Distribution Corporation, and we have an obligation to him. He has been requesting a birth certificate and cannot get it. He's been going all these years under a different name, and we got him a birth certificate because the agency had a different name on. Now we can't find out who he is because he goes by a different name, and his Social Security's all paid under this one name, and it isn't his true name on his birth certificate. And since Mr. Lyman came, we have been real successful in getting any information on any person that we need from the agency. Previous to that, the tribe would not even talk to us at all. We have another problem on a reservation that to do with undivided assets in on allotment. We have 40-acre allotment, just as an instance, where there may be 8 heirs to it. One of the 8 has been terminated from federal supervision, so there's 1/8 of that undivided interest that is taxable. They don't know what for, and they through the Real Property Management Office, irrigation, they send out a water assessment for this one undivided interest to pay, or police is made. They won't advertise his share of it, which is very unfair. This has been called to the attention of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, likewise, Superintendent Lyman, and they're cooperating with us to try to get this corrected. But this is just an example of how Public Law 671 is interpreted by various employees. I really don't believe it came from Commissioner. I don't believe it's a directive from the superintendent or the present superintendent. It might have come from previous superintendents because of their action, but it's very unfair. Another example of how our terminated people were being treated was on welfare or social services. If they own 1 share of stock in your distribution corporation, they would not allow them any help from the welfare in the state. And through the services of our attorney, Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Sixkiller, and myself, went to the state. Now, the person belonging to your distribution, regardless now of what they received during the year, the state welfare would not allow them any help whatsoever, regardless if they were starving or not. However, this has been corrected now that even though they have their shares in stock and they are in need of some assistance from the state, they can receive it. And the amount of dividends paid from your distribution stock is deducted. Now, I'd like to, while we're talking about the money, I'd like to bring you up to date just a little bit on since the Youth Distribution Corporation was incorporated in the laws of the state on November the 8th, 1958. Okay. And I've been on the board of directors since 1958. However, I was not one of the incorporators. LaRena, how long have you been a claimant of termination, and what were you doing before termination started? Before termination started, I was on a tribal business committee. I was vice chairman of the tribal business committee. I also worked in the credit programs, the Ute Indian Tribe, where they made revolving credit lines. There was for a year where I was the acting supervisor. We had no one director of the credit program, and I was the director in that. I was responsible for loans and all the bookkeeping and like that. I've worked for the tribe since 1938. My first job was the tribe secretary. I was the first secretary they ever had. I remember this very well. It was in the old office building, and I think the correspondence that the tribe had at the time which fit in one of our file folder boxes. Not very much. The first day I went down to work, Robert Burns, who was chief clerk at the time, said, "LaRena, this is what you have to file." And I had one little drawer in their vault to work with. And it amazes me now when I go down and see the files and the documents and everything that has come. But I feel proud of this one little act that I did. I was a first secretary, like I said, for the tribe. During the war years, I worked as property clerk at the agency. Then I transferred from property clerk into extension clerk. Worked in there filing. then went back in the credit program for the tribe. I worked there up till 1954 in the termination program. After that, of course, when Public Law 671 became effective, I no longer had a job. So I went to live on my farm in Elderwood. And I was singing, "Glory, hallelujah, for once I'll get to do as I please, because all my children will be in school, and I won't have to do anything. I can just take it easy." I stayed home 6 months and about went stir crazy and up to work for the Board of Education in Duchesne County. And I worked there as secretary in the elementary school for 2 years. And all this time I was on the board of directors for the Distribution Corporation, and I might say without pay. We never received any pay for our services from 58 to 61. We never had an office. Our offices were in my home, or files, or in Mrs. Murdoch's, what we had. We didn't have an office because affiliated youth citizens at that time are still in, as they were reluctant to recognize this. However, our jobs were to approve oil and gas leases, which we did occasionally. In 1961, August the 27th, 1961, we really came into our aid, because that was the end of the era of the affiliated youth citizens, and they no longer were the controlling body, and the Youth Distribution Corporation began to function as a corporation, which they should. However, we still didn't have any office in our offices in my home. We immediately felt the need to find an office, and which we proceeded to do. We had a lot of dissent among our stockholders who had not sold any shares of stock at the time and were trying to tell us what to do. However, we had articles of incorporation and bylaws that we went by, and I might say right today, as of today, that we go right by these articles, every one of them. Our books are audited by Haskins and Sell, the same certified public accountants that does President Johnson's books. So I think the Distribution Corporation is in pretty good hands. We have now some shares of stock in a corporation have been stolen. I could tell you, I'll find a payroll thing. In 1963, some of our stockholders got the bright idea that they might say that the seller shares of stock, and which they proceeded to do. And since then, there's been over half of the stock the corporation sold. The majority of the stock is held by non-Indians. Now, these people who have bought stock in the corporation we have lawyers, doctors, and manufacturers, and men of real good standing, and they have been real helpful to us in the corporation. However, I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that was ever made, was to ever let this stock go from the Distribution Corporation. In 1963, in a stockholder meeting in July, we asked our stockholders, and at that time no one had sold any stock. At that time, we asked them if we could not reserve some of our distribution funds, and if anyone wished to sell their stock, the corporation would buy it and retire the stock. We explained to the people present, that the stockholders present, that by this it would just increase the value of their own stock, and then there wouldn't be non-Indians or anyone like that buying into the corporation. The same group who always opposed any good thing that was proposed, I guess I shouldn't say that, said the stock belonged to them. It was their in-person property and they'd sell it to whom they wanted to, not thinking that of the future and how it would affect them. Some of the people have sold their stock and today have nothing. I would like to at this time inject, perhaps might be helpful, to tell you since November 1st, 1961, when this board started to function, that we have paid out $3,775,450. Hold that again, Lena. Since November the 1st, 1961, when this good board started to function, these intelligent people have, hold on, this thing is joke. We have paid out to the 4,900 shares of stock $3,775,450. Now this amounts to,
and I think we could leave that just like it is because that's right up to date.
Are you talking now?
Yeah, I'm talking. Twice. I said, well, that was good enough because that brings you right up to date. See, we had our last payment in July the 19th. And what we try to do in the corporation is to get enough money to make worthwhile. We try to pay in the spring when they have payments on their income tax, and then just before school, so help them a little bit with their school. But to get back to the termination bill, I like the termination bill myself. I think it's good. However, I do feel like that some of the full-bloods have been terminated because they had a better education than I did. This is the only unfair thing about it. We really didn't need a termination bill, as stated before, because there was a termination program already in force, and then anyone who wished to be terminated from federal supervision could make his application to the Secretary of Interior anyway and be terminated. What else should I tell you about termination? Tell you about the people?
First, yes, but first, LaRena, let's go back. If you were less than a half Indian, you would be terminated. I believe that this was changed, and who changed it and who gave the people to change this the right to do so. Can you tell me more about this?
Well, I don't think anyone had the right to change it. Now, get back to this legislative thing we call that Public Law 671, which is in the rough, and I also have a copy of that, as it was originally written. It was supposed to have been put in the legal form and brought back to people, and this was never done to my knowledge. The Ute Indians or the mixed bloods or anyone else, it was never presented back to them for approval. It was taken to Washington, and when they got Washington, it was changed to read, if you were one half, then you would be terminated. If you were one half, you had to be more than a half to stay on the roll. It also was unfair because they gave the full-bloods a choice that they could go with the mixed bloods if they so desired, but they didn't give the mixed bloods a choice to stay the full bloods if they wanted to, and which I thought was very unfair, and segregation, you might say, was cropping up early in this program. As a result, we had a number of full bloods go with mixed bloods. Then one of the full bloods who changed and went with the mixed bloods is on our board of directors at the present time, Henry Watsock. Then he's
how many full-bloods actually went with the mixed bloods right now?
They're now can inherit. By the choice, as I mentioned before, that full-bloods could go with mixed bloods if they so desired. And there was 14 who went with the mixed bloods. And out of those 14, 7 have sold their stock in the corporation. 7 are still stockholders. Now,
this would be about same percent then as the mixed bloods?
Same as the mixed bloods. I would say the percentage is just about the same. And it's usually those people who sold, and just looking at this, the ones that sold was having difficulty. Now, I feel like, and when I say there was prejudice shown early in this program, that if there was a mixed blood mother or a mixed blood father, and a full-blood mother or full-blood father, and they had these children. I think they should have been given a choice, regardless, to stay so they would keep their unit, either all full-bloods or all mixed bloods, because I know that on a number of occasions, this has even caused divorces in the family. And it just hasn't worked to the best advantage. Of course, this is a new program, and it was instigated by Senator Watkins, who, under his direction or under the Republican administration, Democrats get the Republican administration, where they no longer wanted to give any services to the Indians, so they started this termination program. I happen to be in Washington, D.C. as a delegate to National Congress of American Indians and served on their executive council when the termination programs was being discussed. I testified for the Senate Committee for Menominee Indians on this very termination thing, and while I was in Washington, I was suddenly called by my friends back in Utah telling me what was happening on our reservation, which disturbed me very much. Of course, there wasn't much I could do about it except come back and feel sorry for my family and my relation and my full-blood relation. What was happening to me, we were just thinking the end of the world was coming, because we just didn't know which way we were going to turn. And we just had to pick the pieces up and go on and make the best of it. But like I say, if there was a termination program where there'd be no division amongst the family, and they could all stay together and work, I think it would have been better than the way it is now. So what?
LaRena, who do you actually think started termination? Where did it actually start? Did it start here on our reservation?
Well, there was 2 phases of the termination. I might say 3 phases of it. And all I would say it is a political thing. First, there was the idea was planted, like I said, by Senator Watkins, who was trying to terminate people, and they asked him what he was going to do about his own Indians in Utah. But I think it was previous to that. We had some kind of a disturbance on the reservation because we had certain people on the reservation who wished to get in the driver's seat, you might call, or get the head of the tribe, and they weren't very successful because some of us who could foresee what was happening could oppose some of the things that they were doing. So they came up with the idea that if they couldn't get what they want, that they would just have some kind of a program. And it was the first program, or the only program in the world, I think, where one group of heirs could cut off another group of heirs that was rightfully theirs. Because that's all they are on this reservation, is heirs to the reservation. There's actually no owners. So that was why the assets had to be divided, and the way that it was under this program.
LaRena, some of the mixed bloods that had married back into the full blood group that were terminated, what effect did it have on these families?
Well, like I said, some of them have since divorced. They've had children since, and the children can't be enrolled, and there's just no help for them whatsoever. They can't get help from the welfare because the father is enrolled on the tribe, and it's a tribal obligation to take care of them. Since I have learned through the welfare in Vernal that they are going to try and help them now. But we have some children here in the 2 counties that are, you might say, people without a country, have no place to go. And if it wasn't for the Head Start program, I don't think they'd have any help at all.
The question was asked at a business committee meeting that I attended just recently as to how the Indians, the mixed bloods, and so forth got enrolled on this reservation. LaRena, do you have any knowledge or information as to what happened on this?
Well, under the New Reorganization Act, which was passed passed January the 19th, 1937, the Constitution and Bylaws Union 5 was ratified and approved. The corporate charter was ratified August the 10th, 1938. And in this charter, and also in the Constitution and bylaws. It says any person of Indian blood whose name appear on the official census roll of the Ute Indian tribe of the Uintanoya Reservation as of July the 1st, 1935 would be a member of the Ute Indian tribe. Does that answer your question or previous to that?
That answers the one question. And then when the reservation was first thrown open, and of course I know you're not this old, but you might remember your dad and mother telling you, I think your dad could have been enrolled and wasn't, but who made the decisions as to the enrollment of these people?
I think the superintendent made the decision who was going to be enrolled, because I know my grandfather, Henry Harris, telling me about this. Under the Allotment Act was the first time they had a roll. And so they just went along, and anybody was living here, they gave them allotment, and if they had any kind of Indian blood, they put them on a roll. And in fact, I know one person who is completely white that's on the roll and is one of our stockholders. Ute Distribution Corporation doesn't have a drop of Indian blood. And then we have some Mexicans, or I might say Spanish people, who were enrolled. And I remember this old fellow real well. His name was Daciano Lujan. He lived over in Grand Junction. He came over one time to visit, and he was just a regular old Mexican gentleman. He was white-haired and blue-eyed, and I made the mistake of speaking a few words of Spanish to him, and he carried on a whole conversation. I didn't know what he was talking about, but we had a number of Spanish people on the roll, too.
LaRena, at this meeting, one person that worked for the tribe stated that in White Rocks, the committee itself, and I really don't believe they had a committee at this time, at least from my studies, the bands were not picked until after Fort Duchesne was established. Is this correct?
That's, as far as I know it.
So whoever the acting committee would have been, I didn't get this straight. But at this meeting, it was quoted. I'm not quoting exact words either because I don't remember the exact words. But he did state that the committee acted upon who would be enrolled and who would not be enrolled. Mrs. Lyman, am I stating this right?
Boy, that's where it was stated.
And this rather made me wonder as to who the committee was or who was making these decisions. Do you know anything about this?
I don't know anything about any decisions because they had a fire at White Rocks and the agency was up there and all the records were burnt. And they may have had a council meeting and discussed it at a council, but regardless if they had a committee or not, it still wouldn't stand because your Constitution of the Ute Indian tribe says that everybody was on the roll. And July the 1st, 1935 is a member of the Ute Indian tribe. And this white person I'm talking about is the same as a full blood because she was on the roll at the time. And this says that they were Indians. So regardless of how many councils they had or a committee, anything previous to that, it would stand after.
This person may have said the general council rather than a committee meeting.
I know Grandfather Harris spoke of several councils they had because of the records being burnt, of numbers of names that were suggested. And
all right, LaRena, in writing, and you may not even want us to put this in, but if you do, what % would you say of the mixed bloods are successful fraud termination and living in their communities and so forth? Could you give any information on this, or would you want?
Well, just offhand, I'd say 10% only
Are successful.
I don't think there'd be any more than out of the 490. I don't think there's any more in it.
Well, then, do you think, are the rest on welfare, or?
They're on welfare and living in hopes of getting some settlements and easements against the government. Maybe I put 10%. Maybe it might be a little bit low. But when you take 100%, you take 10% out of it. That means, 10 out of every 100. So that would be out of 490, that is 50 people. I'd say there's that many that have gone out and tried to establish themselves.
This certainly wouldn't prove termination is a success then.
I wouldn't say it's a success. But termination is just like anything else. It's up to the individual. He can make of it what he wants to. But I don't believe that some of our mixed bloods are ready for termination. some of them couldn't even read and write, sign their own name. The grades and they, some of them just went to 3rd or 4th grade.
But LaRena, did the mixed bloods try to fight termination in any sense that were realizing some of these things?
There was only one person objected to the termination bill, and that was me. I wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Interior and objected to it. I felt like it was the wrong thing to do. But when he was speaking to the rest, they were all in favor of it. By the way, my children weren't on the roll, only have one on the roll. The others are on the enrollment.
So this also hurt the mixed bloods as far as their children and enrollment was concerned also.
Yeah, well, it hurt my family individual because I had one on and the rest have the same amount of Indian blood. And it raised a question in their mind. How come one is favored over the other? It raised a question in my children's mind.
All right, if a survey was taken of the mixed blood group, even the 10%, how many do you think would still favor termination?
I would say that's still at 10% to what has been successful.
So the other 90% would still go back with full blood group.
They would if they had the chance, I'm sure.
Even realizing the prejudice that exists between the full blood and the mixed blood?
No, because I don't think they realize there's a prejudice there. They're not thinking. Now, I had one tell me the other day that he would like just to have this fishing or hunting privilege, going to kill the deer. Now, I said, you can have us by a state law and go kill a deer. Same thing, I can't see any advantage in just going back and having all of your interest revert back to tribe when you die, just for the privilege of killing a deer in the summertime.
When termination was presented to the General Council, and we will have the date on this when you receive your starter hearing material back in Salt Lake. But was this the first time that either the mixed blood or full blood, other than yourself, was aware of termination?
No.
How long had it been talked about?
30 minutes before they voted on it.
30 minutes before they voted on it.
Before they voted on it.
Who discussed?
No, on the division.
On the division.
On the division, not termination, the division.
On the division. All right, LaRena, who got up at the meeting and introduced the division?
Or who told the people what was taking place? Francis McKinley.
Francis McKinley. And who was there to support him and back him in this material?
Well, Stella LaRose was one of them.
LaRena, who was present at the meeting other than Francis McKinley?
Well, the best of my knowledge, if I recall, a temporary chairman who conducted this meeting was Harvey Natchez. And the 5 men who presented the proposition for the division between the mixed bloods and the full bloods was Robert L. Bennett, Francis McKinley, R.O. Curry, Ernest Wilkinson, and John S. Boyd. These were the ones that presented it. Francis McKinley did the interpreting. And in the interpretation, he told the Indians that they wanted this because the mixed bloods no longer would get anything. They wouldn't get any money or anything. And this is why I believe that the full bloods voted for it. If they knew, that.
I think, LaRena, I'm not sure if been you who told me, but I believe you once stated that some of the full bloods objected and wanted to wait for this, to think this over.
That's true. That's true. Jim Atwine, an old leader of the Uinta band, got up and made a speech, and I have a copy of this speech, asking them to please wait 10 days. He said, this is affecting some of my relatives. And he said, I think we should think about this. But they refused to listen to this old gentleman, and like I said, there was some 15 who voted against it, and I also have their names. I remember one old gentleman, Tecumseh Murray, voted for it and voted against it. He raised his hand when they voted for it and raised his hand when he voted against it. He was counted both times. He's in the 15, I have too. But I would like to say this, Norma. You asked me a while ago the 10% who were successful and doing things on the termination program. I think you'll find the ones who are doing things things are the Sherman kids, the kids that went to Sherman. We have down here this new curio shop. They're products of boarding school. Eva Harris went to Sherman, and her husband Norman went to Haskell Institute, a boarding school. And we just have a number of them. I could just go on and tell you any number. Mrs. Sixkiller, who was president of the Youth Distribution Corporation, doing a fine job as Sherman student, graduate. Right now offhand, but I could just tell you any number, and I guess maybe I'm partial to Sherman, but I wish boarding schools would come back because I think this is a thing we need for our kids.
A lot of the students in the schools, the mixed blood students, have asked me many times, why under the division as you have today wasn't money set up to take care of a lot of the needs of the mixed blood like they have done for the full bloods in having sports and different types of things, because sometimes they're not even sure which side of the fence they belong on. Was anything like this ever discussed, LaRena?
No, there was no provision for it because, you mean from federal grants or something? No, because Public Law 671 says that you'll no longer be recognized for any services that the government may give you. You no longer get that.
This means public health.
Any of it, any services that the government may offer, federal services, you would no longer be entitled to that as your status as an Indian.
Unless you married back into another tribe. Was this correct?
No, even though you're terminated and you're not entitled to anything. That's it. You've had it.
All right, now we stated that the people only knew 30 minutes before the voting what was going to take place. But of course, the other people who presented this knew it.
Well, they certainly must have been talking about it because they couldn't have come and presented it in the manner in which they did if they had some plan they'd been working on for a number of days.
LaRena, how is this youth distribution unique throughout the country?
It's the only corporation in the whole United States set up for Indians or former Indians of a tribe, and it's a non-taxable corporation. The sole purpose is to receive and pay out. It isn't a corporation to make profits or anything like that to go at business. It receives and pays out, and that way it's unique.
LaRena, if termination bill could be written again and could be started again from the first, what would be some of the main things that you think should be changed in it?
Well, I think a termination program, one of the most important things is to have a civil rights plank in it, whereby that a person would have the right to say if he wished to remain under the supervision of the government or if he wished to be out on his own. Under Public Law 671, you didn't have this right, and which I felt went against the Constitution of the United States. Because in 1924, when the Indians were made full citizens of the United States, it gave us all of the rights in the Bill of Rights. And one said that we had the right to defend ourselves and pursuit of happiness and choose. And Public Law 671 did not give us this right. That would be the first thing that I would put in it, that you would have this right to choose yourself as an individual. One of the second things I would do is that, of course, I'm old now and things are changing to the young, but I feel like the Ute Indian tribe did themselves a disservice. And I would say for future, if there was a termination program, that I'd make a cash settlement. I wouldn't give land and undivided assets or part of it. I would try to determine the valuation and make a cash settlement. And if that person was satisfied with what he received, I'd make it worth his while, and that's the way I would deal with it. I wouldn't have it like it is now, because the way it is now, under the Ute Distribution Corporation, where the stock has been sold, and the stock represents that Indian who was terminated in federal supervision, his undivided assets and those which could not be divided equitably. No, we have white people now sharing what rightfully should belong to the Indian. And if a caste settlement was made, we wouldn't have these non-Indians sharing, or even eventually who's going to be on the board of directors, Ute Distribution. And the Tribal Business Committee and the board of directors for the Ute Distribution Corporation have to work together on oil and gas leases and the minerals and prospecting on the reservation. And it's not going to be too far in the future that the full-bloods are going to be dealing with white people.
LaRena, why didn't the tribe buy the stock back so that this would not happen?
I don't know what their reason was for, but I do know that we approached them on it, and we felt like that it would be a good thing for the tribe to do. There was only one member on that tribal business committee who was in favor of it, and that was Maxie Chapoose. He was very much in favor of it. Of course, Max Setz isn't on the committee, but I don't know what the reason was. But if they would have bought it back, then this would still be under Indian, and we wouldn't have this, like I told you, that eventually they're going to be dealing with white people, or I shouldn't say white people, but I say non-Indians. And this wouldn't have happened. Now, to get back to this prejudice thing on a reservation and the way, my children are quite prominent in athletics, just like Mrs. Sixkiller's and Norma's boys were, and they enjoyed playing baseball and basketball and things like that. And when before termination, they played with the boys on the reservation. After termination, they weren't allowed to play with them anymore. And this hurt some of the boys' feelings because some of their very best friends were full-blood boys, the boys they went to school with, and in elementary and junior high and high school were ate with them at their own tables and slept with them. And all of a sudden we had the termination program, and it broke this friendship up until it really hurt them. And if the tribe would have continued to let the mixed bloods play ball with them or whatsoever on the reservation, they could have built a better program, I feel, because through the help of these mixed blood boys or full blood boys could have learned to do things that they needed to do. Even the swimming pool was segregated. They had a swimming pool at Fort Duchesne, and full bloods swam at a certain hour, then the mixed bloods could swim at another hour. And I think when you carry your termination or your segregation even to your swimming pool, you're going pretty far. And then we had another incident which just behooves me. We had a fellow die, and even the cemeteries, you've got to get permission now. You can't bury in the cemetery. And I don't believe the cemeteries were even divided under the division of the assets. And I think this is terrible when something like this, you die and you have to get permission to be.
Mr. Boyd said it once at one meeting. He stated,
What, that the cemeteries?
yes, that so much.
Well, I think when
The
they
only
come.
one could be there is the one that be buried there was the mixed bloods member of the mixed blood in his family is on the roll.
So I guess as a result of that, if any of us die, we're going to have to find someplace else to be buried. Well, that's too bad. Now to get back to this segregation thing and the trouble it causes in your family, I have this right in my home. Some of the biggest arguments I have in my home is at the breakfast table with my husband. He works for the tribe, and I work for the Ute Distribution Corporation. Of course, he has to be loyal to the tribe, and I'm loyal to the Ute Distribution Corporation. So some of the biggest arguments we have is at our breakfast table. So we've learned since 10 years ago that he leaves his tribal work over on the reservation, and I leave the Ute Distribution in the office.
That. LaRena, among the 490 mixed blood members, what happened to the writers, and what rights do they have and who is responsible for their rights?
Now, the minor children that was involved in his termination program had the same rights as the adults. However, the Secretary of the Interior and the board of directors for the affiliated youths negotiated a trust agreement with the First Security Bank in Salt Lake City, and all of their funds are sent to the First Security Bank, and they in turn invested the money in bonds or whatsoever and set aside so much for these children that they could use for school. But first it had to be requested for. Now, a number of the parents took out guardianship, state guardianship on their children, but later transferred that guardianship into the trust. Now, all their money, whenever dividend payment is made, is sent to the First Security Bank for that individual minor, and it's placed in his account for investment or for his use. When he becomes 21, then he receives any money, or he can do whatever he wishes to when he reaches age 21. Now, this applies both to girls and boys. The laws in the state of Utah says that when a girl reaches the age of 18 or marriage or gets married, she automatically becomes an adult. However, in this trust agreement, that isn't so. You have to be 21 years of age regardless if you marry or not.
On Monday, what is the date?
July 29th.
July 29th, 1968, in the affiliated youth office.
Yeah. In the Youth Distribution Corporation.
Distribution Corporation office. I'll be shot for that. And the interview was with LaRena Iorg and Lena Sixkiller, who were both former members of the Ute Indian tribe.